We always like to have a non-CFO here in this morning and discuss something different. Over the years, we've had a magician, we've had I think a health fitness guru get everyone to do jumping jacks in their chairs, if you might remember. And this year we're having Laura, who is coming up on stage shortly, and she's going to talk about success version 2.0. We've all been successful in your careers. That's why you're here today. That's why you're pursuing at your companies. But it's really what's next. And it's really, she wrote a great book called Wonder Hell, When Success Doesn't Feel Like It. What a great title. I'm so happy to welcome Laura on stage and to change it up a little bit. Thank you.
I got it. Hello. Let's talk about that moment where you've achieved something you didn't quite think you could pull off. It's exciting, it's engaging, it's humbling, it's kind of wonderful, right? The work you did opened more doors than you ever thought possible, but it also teased the possibility of even more doors that you never thought possible. And maybe, just maybe, as you peeked through those doors between who you used to be and who you now know you can become, you thought to yourself, I think I want more. We've all been there. You've all been there. You wouldn't be in this room today. Each new success handed you another version of yourself, an increased possibility, an increased potential. And inside of that increased potential, the increased possibility, you also saw bigger hunger, larger goals. And inside that increased hunger, the faster pace and the larger goals, what did you find? Anxiety. You found uncertainty. You found doubt. You found stress. The success you achieved was kind of wonderful, but it also felt a little bit like hell. And I like to call this space Wonder Hell. Wonder Hell is the space where the burden of your potential walks in, unpacks its backpack, and says, hey, what you got for me, huh? Are you going to live into this newfound you that you didn't even realize existed last week, last month, or last year? And it starts the moment that you realize that your idea can be bigger, that your company can be bigger, that you can be bigger. Because ego has entered the chat, and it's good. The only problem is that we live in an ambitious, results-oriented world. And somewhere in the alchemy between achievement and exhaustion, we mischaracterize all the turbulent emotions that come next. And we think we just have to cling by our fingertips until we get through this one next process change, policy change, promotion, until we get to the other side. And so we go to the experts for advice. And we hear things like, you gotta rise and grind, hustle harder, lean in. Or the other experts, the ones telling us to stop apologizing and wash our face and follow your passion. Now, I found myself in Wonder Hell multiple times in my career, and neither of these two paths ever worked for me. And neither of these paths ever worked for the thousands of leaders who I stewarded during massive moments of career shift and organizational disruption during 20 years in executive search, placing senior leaders in some of the largest organizations in our world. And I'm guessing that neither of these have worked for you either. Short term, maybe yes, but long term, it seems like we keep finding ourselves back in Wonder Hell. And so the last time I found myself in Wonder Hell, I decided to go on a pilgrimage. I was like, there's gotta be a way out. I've gotta be able to figure this out. And so I talked to 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns, because I thought success was gonna look like this. It's gonna be a trip to the amusement park. It's gonna be super fun. We're gonna ride all the rides. We're gonna eat all the foods. It's gonna be great, quality family time. And then it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're dehydrated, and your kids are whining, and that corn dog that you stress ate and you shoved down with the cotton candy and the icy is rebelling, and it wants to come out when you're waiting in line for the roller coaster you didn't even want to go on. Why does success actually feel like this sometimes? So if that's the old way, I said no way. There had to be a better way. And so on the pilgrimage, I went. 100 different glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup unicorns. I talked to thinkers and creatives, philanthropists and activists. I talked to everyday people like you and like me, all in search of finding a way out. And each of the people that I spoke to told me about achieving something they never thought they could achieve. And people that I spoke to also told me about facing crushing doubt, uncertainty, exhaustion, envy, and burnout along the way. And each of the people I spoke to also got to the other side and the better for it. So how'd they do it? Along the way, they found themselves in imposter town, where they were like, am I even allowed to have this bigger goal? They found themselves in Doubtsville, where the only thing they knew for certain was that they knew nothing for certain, because every new level seemed to bring a new devil. And they found themselves in Burnout City, where they weren't sure if they were even going to get through this next big thing. So I spent a little time today thinking about all of you as I was coming here, because Wonder Hell consists of these 3 towns. Each of these 3 towns has 5 rides, and each of these rides evokes an emotion that you may be feeling when you're faced with that next big promotion, process change, or policy innovation. So I thought about your jobs, and I thought about how you're dealing with technology, how you're dealing with generative AI, you're dealing with the cybersecurity, you're dealing with the teams and the technology. I thought about the cultural implications that all of this is forcing you to face. I thought about the demographics and how you're trying to build world-class finance teams, all while you are having a huge demographic shift of the people that are working with you. You're trying to upsell people on your team into jobs that they're not even certain about. And I thought about your own roles, which are now forward-facing. You're the face of trust and empathy, resilience, collaboration, all of the things that you have to think about every single day. And I thought about everything else that's going on right now. And so I came up with 3 rides that we're going to go on today. And on each of those rides, we're going to be accompanied by one of the people who I spoke to and the lesson that I learned from them. We'll take a couple questions at the end, all in time to get you a break for coffee. Sound like a plan?
Great.
All right. So welcome to Imposter Town, which is our first stop. Because the gates of Wonder Hell are your personal portal to everything you ever wanted to achieve, if only you were bold enough to see it, believe it, and actually act upon it. Because the first lesson that I learned from the people that I spoke to is that they had to deal with this voice that was inside of their head, and they had to learn to come to terms with their ambition. Do you know why internal candidates always leave if they don't get the job? An internal candidate who's interested in a promotion, you give them a great interview, they've got their day in court, but they don't get the job, and eventually they leave. Why? Because the very process of interviewing for this bigger role means that they have to wear the voice of that role. They have to wear the clothes of that role. They have to wear the mindset of that role. And once they wear this new role, they can't unwear it. Once they see themselves in this new, bigger way, they can't unsee themselves in this new, bigger way. Just like you, just like the last time you achieved success and you saw this version of yourself. Now, Sally Krawcheck saw herself in a new, bigger way one morning while she was putting on her mascara, right after she got fired for a second time. She leaned into the mirror and she said, you know, the retirement savings crisis is really a woman's crisis. Sally knew that women tend to make less money than men. They tend to take on more family debt. Or more family leave. They tend to take on more family debt. And they tend to live a little bit longer. Women live about 8 years longer than men, and about 80% of them die alone. And she thought, you know, the gender pay gap is an issue, but it's nothing compared to the faux empowerment way that we speak to women about investing. They get one of 2 messages. Either it's condescending, like, oh, you bought too many shoes and you can't afford your apartment? Huh, too bad. Or it's fear-mongering, like, math is hard. Okay, Mr. Big, go buy the T-bone steak and the sports car because you deserve it. And Sally thought, is it any surprise that 99% of the investment dollars invested in this country are invested by companies owned by men? So Sally thought about what she could do about it. And she thought, what if somebody created an investment bank for women, by women? She'd never imagined anything like this in her life. She'd been super successful. She wasn't some random person who was musing about the state of women in this economy. But in fact, she'd cut her teeth on Wall Street in the highest offices and the biggest corner offices, Sanford C. Bernstein, Smith Barney, Citigroup. And she did it fast, too. She said, I went from managing 286 people on a Wednesday to 40,000 people on a Thursday. But she never imagined anything like this thing that she imagined. What if there was an investment bank by women for women? Welcome to the Imaginarium, where you walk in one person and you walk out a completely different person. Because that vision that you have in your mind of yourself will not be dislodged no matter what you do. It's not that the vision is what changes you. What I learned is that it's the interpretation of that vision that changes you. So Sally, who had never had anything like this before, had a brand new interpretation of who she could be and what she should become. There's a 120-year-old theory in psychology called the looking glass theory. And the looking glass theory says you're not who you think you are, and you're not who I think you are. You're who you think I think you are. I'm going to say that again because it's early and I know some of you are still metabolizing your coffee. You're not who you think you are, and you're not who I think you are. You're who you think I think you are. So if you're being asked to think in ways you've never been asked to think in before, if you're being asked to do things you've never had to do before, if you're being asked to change things you've never had to change before, of course, that's when imposter syndrome starts to creep in. I'm not going to go on a whole thing about imposter syndrome. You all know what it is. What I want to tell you about imposter syndrome is that 70% of us have it. Regardless of your sex, regardless of your gender, regardless of your age, 70% of us have experienced imposter syndrome. So I just for a second want to talk about the term imposter. You don't belong here. Maybe you should leave. Or syndrome. You seem a little sick. You want to lie down? So unless you're one of the people who suffers from Dunning-Kruger, which says the very people who have the most imposter syndrome, in fact, have the least, we all know this guy, then what I learned from the people that I spoke to is that they didn't wear imposter syndrome as a diagnosis. In fact, they saw it as an opportunity to play bigger, to embrace their ambition and play bigger. It wasn't a diagnosis to them. In fact, imposter syndrome was a badge of honor. The people that I spoke to were able to thrive in Wonder Hell, whether they were starting their second billion-dollar company, or they were on the top of a gold medal run ski slope, having a gold medal in their pocket from the one before, still felt like this is the moment where I don't make it work. This is the moment where everything goes wrong. This is the moment when everybody figures out I don't belong here. And what they were able to do was the simplest hack in the entire world. Now, I have a lot of research and a lot of data behind what I present to you, but let me tell you, this is like a self-helpy hack if there ever was one. They were able to change the voice inside their head from a limitation to an invitation by doing this one incredible, simple thing, which is to say, not, I've never done this before, but I've never done this before. And so we talk to our team members, and our team members are worried about what we're trying to get them to do next, and we're worried about what we're trying to do next. We think to ourselves that if I've never done this before, suddenly it's stressful. There's tons of mistakes. It is going to be embarrassing. It's going to be finale. But if we say, I've never done this before, all of a sudden it turns into this exciting educational learning adventure. It's not finale, but it's fulcrum. So if it's to change, why shouldn't it be you who changes it? Because Wonder Hell only presents itself to people who are worthy of it. If you were at the end of your growth, you wouldn't be feeling this fear. You wouldn't be feeling this excitement. In 20 years of executive search, I talked to all manner of people who came to me with all manner of bold, audacious goals. And the only ones who were actually able to achieve what they dreamed about were not the ones that got all caught up in the wonder of it, but the ones who actually respected the hell. Because once you see this next version of yourself, once you see this next level of success, before you've even achieved it, you've already internalized the promise and the pressure and the excitement and everything that you can be when you realize that there is the you before this realization, and then there's the you after it. And that brings us to Doubtsville. It's time to embrace your ambition, whether you want to or not. Now, when we find ourselves in Doubtsville, we are uncertain about this whole tsunami of emotions that are coming at us. We don't know if they're good feelings, if they're bad feelings. We don't know if we're allowed to have these feelings. But we learn to stop and pause and listen to them. The people who I spoke to, who were experts in surviving Wonder Hell, they understood that these emotions that they were feeling were not necessary evils, but they were actually incredibly helpful allies. And so, like Alan Mulally on his very first day of Ford, they learned to stop and listen, learn from them, and grow from them. Now, Alan walked in on his very first day at Ford looking dapper in his navy blue jacket and his khaki pants. The only problem was that Ford was a decidedly blue pinstripe kind of place. Now, this should have been the first indication of corporate brass that things were going to be a little bit different with Alan at the helm, but Alan was also the very first person to run an American auto company who didn't grow up in the American auto industry. And that would have been fine if, say, Ford and the American auto industry was humming along at the time, but this is 2006, and Ford and the American auto industry were on life support at best. The automobile industry that Alan Mulally found was one of siloed management meetings. It was one where progress could be inflated and mistakes could be hidden, bad behavior could be stoked. And Alan said to me, Laura, I knew the very first thing I had to do when I got to Ford is I had to change the environment to become a team environment, and I needed to start with love. So my friends, the next ride we're going to go on is the tunnel of love, because when it gets dark and things get uncertain and everything is rocking, the people who are next to you and are on your team are going to be the ones who make it work. Now, Alan had started his career 20 years earlier at Boeing. And he was an astronautical engineer. He was having the time of his life building the best airplanes he could possibly build, and he rose to the ranks, again, very quickly, like a lot of us, alone. But he did such a good job that the senior folks at Boeing said, we're going to give you an engineer to manage. They gave him an engineer to manage, and Alan's like, it was amazing. We were building great airplanes, and I was giving him feedback. I was managing, except he was really micromanaging. And one day, this engineer came to him and said, Alan, listen, you're great, but before you give me any more feedback, I need to let you know I'm quitting. Now, Alan, who is, one of the best managers of all time now, at the time was gobsmacked. He was like, I don't understand. Why are you quitting? And the engineer said, look, Alan, Boeing is a command and control kind of place. But that's not you. You're a really neat guy, and you really care. And if you were just you, you'd actually do a far better job. And so Alan stopped and he thought a little bit about the lessons that he learned growing up from his parents. To live is to serve. The purpose of life is to understand before you're understood. Expect the unexpected and expect to deal with it. And he knew that when he got to Ford, he had to break down the culture that was there. There are studies that say, if you say, I smoke, you are far more likely to quit smoking than people who say, I am a smoker. And that's the difference between habit and identity. And so Alan knew that when he got to Ford, the first thing he had to do is he had to break down some of the old habits if he was going to shake up people's identity. Now, in January of 2019, my company began to run a global assessment. We wanted to know what engaged people at work and in life. We have more than 10,000 responses from 74 different countries in every possible demographic in every possible industry. And what we learned in that survey was that almost every single one of us want work to be a thing that engages us and excites us every single day. We want work to inspire us. But very few of us actually have a leader who inspires us. And so Alan had to think about those values. How does he get people excited? What values does he hold? What matters to him? And so how can he wear that on his sleeve so that he can show other people what matters to him so that they can understand if they belong in his Ford? By the time Alan got to Ford 20 years later, that working together strategy crystallized on one single piece of paper. And I'm not going to go through all this. You've all studied Alan Mulally, you've studied Ford, you've all read all of the books about him, you've listened to stories about him. But this is his strategy, and yes, it starts with love. When I spoke to Alan, I didn't want to know what the strategy was. I wanted to know how he came up with it and why it worked. And so he told me the first thing he did when he got to Ford was he brought everyone together in the Thunderbird conference room, and he put all of their assignments up on the wall, all of the projects, and he gave them color codes. Green meant things are great. Everything's awesome. Yellow meant, I'm getting a little bit nervous, things are in trouble. And red was like, danger, Will Robinson, I need help. In the very first meeting, everything on the wall was awash in green. In the second meeting, everything on the wall was awash in green. And in the third meeting, everything on the wall was awash in green. And he said, Laura, we were losing $17 billion a year. Everything could not be going well. And then back in the corner, one of the senior guys raised his hand, and Alan was like, I was so excited. He stops the entire meeting, and he focuses on this one senior manager, and he gets him to talk about the problem, and everybody brainstorms, and they solve his problem. And the next meeting, he puts that senior manager right next to him at that big round table, because he wanted everyone to understand that we can go farther and we can go faster if we go together. Working together, even though it came rooted in the mind of a rocket scientist, wasn't rocket science. It was simply a manifestation of Alan's values. So in these moments when we're filled with doubt and we're not really sure where to go, it turns out that the way that we renegotiate our relationship with all of the uncertainty is actually through our values. Because the road to unbridled success goes directly through those values. So what is it that you stand for? Your values will allow you to renegotiate your way through anytime you have those doubts. And that brings us to our last stop, which is Burnout City. Because Wonder Hell loves itself a repeat visitor. We think that things will settle down after, that it'll get easier when. We just have to get through this one stomach-churning, butt-clenching, fight-or-flight moment, and then everything's going to be amazing. My husband and I once said that things will settle down after the wedding. My husband and I have been married for 28 years. My husband and I are still waiting. Anne McFerrin was sick of waiting. Anne McFerrin was sick of waiting. She came to this country with 17 words of English between her and her mother, immigrants from Thailand. She wasn't very comfortable with how she sounded, and she wasn't very comfortable with how she looked, but when she put on her fake lashes, she felt like $1 million. The only problem was she couldn't find lashes that she loved in the United States. And she said, where are all the glamorous lashes that I remember seeing in Thailand? And wouldn't it be great if they could be like magnetic? So if I had magnetic eyeliner and then little like magnetic dots in the lashes, they would stick. And all of you now are like, what, we're talking about investment assets and we're talking about Ford, now you're talking about lashes? Let me give you some numbers. Anne said, all I needed to do was sell them $10,000 of lashes a month and everything would be great. And the first month, she sold $20,000 of lashes. And the second month, she sold $40,000 of lashes. And the third month, $60,000 of lashes. She was doing all the things all the time. She was taking the videos. She was DMing with her customers on Instagram. She was storing and she was stocking. It was all from her one tiny little apartment in Koreatown, her studio apartment in Koreatown in LA. And the pace that she was growing was untenable. By month 6, she was selling $1 million of lashes a month. So welcome to the whack-a-mole game. Because we all know what we're supposed to do, we think, and we all know where we're supposed to go, we think, but it seems that we keep getting distracted on our path towards our goals. Let me bring you back, let me bring you back to that survey for a moment. In our survey, we wanted to understand what people were doing all day, whether they felt connected or not to the work that they were doing. And we found that less than half of all people that we talked to said that they could connect what they were doing on a daily basis to the work of their company, the long-term goals of their company. We found that less than half of the people that we spoke to, again, 10,000 people from all around the world, said that they even understood what that long-term goal even was. And we found that less than half of all people said that they even knew what they themselves needed to do on a daily basis to get their own work done. It's not that we're too busy, it's that we're too busy doing things that don't actually matter. Every productivity journal you're going to read is going to be like, eat the frog first, do the worst thing first thing, get it over with. But that puts you in the spot where you're doing all the things that are on fire, but never actually the things that are moving your work forward. The hardest and best piece of advice I ever got in my life was, you're just not that important. And this is pretty hard advice to get. you're just not that important. At the time, I was building my business, I was building my family, I was building my community, and I sure felt pretty important to all of these things. Anybody here not feel that important? Okay. Every once in a while, somebody raises their hand and I get nervous. But here's the lesson. You're just not that important except where you are. So Anne had to spend some time thinking about how she was spending her time. And she realized that the most important thing that she needed to do was to set the culture in her company. She wanted to make sure that everybody was happy where she worked. She needed to be the visionary for the brand. These were things that nobody else could do. Nobody else could set culture. Nobody else could be the visionary. No one else could be the creative. And so she spent all of her time doing that because she realized that the most important thing, the highest and best use of your time, is to spend time doing what only you can do. I'm going to say that again because that's a really important lesson. The highest and best use of your time when you find yourself growing and changing and in the space that you've never been in before is to ask yourself again, what are the things that only I can do? And then how do you double down there? Because Wonder Hell isn't the breakdown, it's the breakthrough. Anne said, once I did that, everything changed. I was more relaxed. I was more excited about my work. I was re-energized again. I didn't feel burnout. I was able to make sure that my people stayed happy, and we had a completely new environment. So, before we go to questions, I'm going to remind you that we've been through Imposter Town, where we learned that we're allowed to have these bigger goals, that these voices in our heads that are telling us and warning us to stay back are not limitations, but in fact, invitations to everything that we can become. We've been through Doubtsville. We've learned to renegotiate our relationship by understanding that the path through lies directly in the values we hold dear. And we've been through Burnout City, where we understand that the way to not burn on every burner is to do the things that only you can do. So we'll take a few minutes for questions before we close.
Love it. I feel like I want to run through a brick wall after. I'm important. Who's important enough to ask a question? Brave? Any brave souls there? Nobody? Oh, there we go. I love it.
One in the back.
Of course.
Love it. Free lunch for you.
Burning off my breakfast. Who was it? Oh, hey, Joe. There you go. Hey, Melissa.
So my name is Joan Pellizzari. I really liked your presentation. I do have a question for you. A lot of the lessons you're talking about for senior execs or people along their career path are also applicable for early starters in a profession. And I'm wondering if you are focused or have any help or aids or suggestions to pass along to people starting early in their career. I have two sons who are just starting in their career, and there's a lot of imposter syndrome going on. And it'd be nice to be able to open their minds and eyes to the opportunities that creates. So I thought maybe you might be able to comment on that part of it, at that part of a person's career. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll say this. You can tell them that nobody else knows what they're doing either. Number one. Number two, if you find yourself in a place where you actually aren't an imposter, I mean, shame on you. It means you've stopped growing. And I'll say the reason that I learned that is because when I worked in the White House, I got to the White House, I was all of 22 years old. I didn't know my head from my rear end. I was literally wearing my mother's suits. Picture me in the 80s, uniform with the bow and the shoulder pads. And I walked in, and everybody else in the office was like bright, young, and hungry, and they were all, they came from fancy schools and fancy colleges and mommy and daddy's money, and I didn't. And I sat down at this table, and everybody's there with their dog-eared New York Times and all of their notes, and they're all writing all their ideas, and I had no ideas. And I sat there, and I wrote things like pick up the dry cleaning, bathe the dog, because I needed to look like I had ideas and I was thinking about things. And here's the problem. When we're so busy faking it till we make it and trying to pretend like we belong, we actually miss what's happening. And so I missed the way that relationships were created. I missed the way that deals were being done. I missed how people were getting to know each other. And I missed listening and learning to everything about just everything that was happening around me. And my pace of growth slowed down because I was so busy trying to pretend like I'd already grown. So I would tell him that the best thing that he can do is to fully embrace being an imposter, because that's the place where we learn and we grow. Do you have time for one more? Right here, right behind you.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Very inspiring, Sergey. I want your comment. So I really love this. Spend all of your time doing what only you can do. Question: if we'll replace can to the only you want to do. So, can we replace can on want?
Well, it depends on how much personal agency you have in your company to be able to do that. I would say yes, but I think in some places you're going to obviously have to make an argument about why that's the case. I think it's impossible to be insatiably hungry for somebody else's goals. And in fact, the last book that I wrote was about how I made thousands of phone calls to thousands of people who were super successful, all because they were super successful. I wanted to recruit them away to my clients. But they all called me back because despite that success, they weren't very happy. And it was because they were doing what only they could do, but not only what they wanted to do. And so as you're thinking about the team that works for you, it is very important to have conversations with them about what they actually care about, what excites them, what lights them up. It used to be that there were these 8 motivating factors that we would look for. What's the mission of the organization? Am I inspired by the leader? How much will I learn? How prestigious will it look on my resume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we thought about them all only in one order. Money is number one and everything else follows. And it turns out that all the people who work for you will have very different ideas about what actually inspires them. And that report that I put up with the QR code, there's tons of information behind that about what actually inspires people to do it. So talking to your people about what they want to do, not only what you think they should or could do, I think is very important. So let me close by telling you, get the slides back up for a moment. Okay. So we got to exit the gift shop, of course. And let me tell you what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with a thought that everything that came before now isn't the final destination. In fact, it's a portal to everything that you're capable of doing. That what you see before you is not just the way things are today, but the way things can be in the future. Because Wonder Hell urges you to expand your boundaries. Wonder Hell invites you to dive into that discomfort. And Wonder Hell introduces you to your true promise if you let it. Sally Krawcheck's Elevest now has $2 billion under management. Alan Mullally saved Ford Motor Company and the American auto industry. And Ann McFerrin, for those of you who are doubting the story about lashes, she sells more than $50 million of lashes every single year. And those lashes are available on every Sephora on the planet. Your Wonder Hell is your opportunity. So what will you do with your opportunity? And what will you do with your Wonder Hell? My friends, it's time to find out. Thank you. I'm Laura Gassner Otting, and welcome to Wonder Hell.